the purpose of this is to bring us white folks into awareness of how we are blocking the progress of racial justice or the dismantling of white supremacy culture, patriarchy, racism, all of the things that come along with this culture of harm that many of us are trying to heal and shift away from. Specifically here, we'll be talking about anti-racism and whiteness. And so within that context, white folks are really slowing the process down because we oftentimes, I like to think about the great white awakening of 2020, where a lot of us white folks really became aware of how present racism still is. And in that time, there were a lot of us white folks that kind of rushed into urgency to want to help and fix this thing called racism. And now that we're in 2024, at the time of me recording this, there's just been a lot of kind of like dropout of white people being involved, or there's become sort of these habits of norms that are not necessarily really helping all that much, sort of performative, like maybe a land acknowledgement on a website at a predominantly white institution who's not doing anything beyond that. Just those kind of like stamps of, oh, this is what we do now. But a lot of white folks have just kind of stepped out, and it might, and I'm not shaming white folks. A big part of this is we just need to acknowledge what's going on, acknowledge ourselves with without judgment, really, as far as without shaming, without any of those kinds of things that just really close people off even more. So a lot of white folks, I believe, are afraid of being called in, being called out. We oftentimes aren't aware of how our ancestral trauma or our personal traumas are kind of getting mixed in with when we do get called in or called out. So for example, if I'm a white person who tends to take up a lot of airtime within a collective space, maybe somebody were to tell me, a person of color or a white person, to be like, hey, you're kind of taking up a lot of space with your shares, could you just move back a little bit to leave more space for other people? There might be a childhood wound that is like, I was always told to be quiet, and how dare you tell me to be quiet? And then that also gets coupled with this sense of white entitlement. Like, I have a right to be heard. I've fought hard in my life to be heard. I should be able to take up as much space as I want, or this is not an inclusive space. So it's like one example of how when we don't examine how the culture has programmed us to either feel like we're a little bit better because we're white, or feel like we have the right to this and that, coupled with awareness of our nervous system responses because of trauma. When we don't take that time to be accountable and to make that space to really see ourselves in a more honest light, we just aren't able to take in oftentimes information